Welcome to the Church Sound Podcast, part of the Repurpose Network, where kingdom culture, real life, and technology intersect. I'm your host, Prentiss Thompson, and what we do? We talk to real people, pastors, leaders, engineers, tech people, manufacturers, worship leaders, all about church, technology, and provide solutions for a successful Sunday morning service. You ready? It's time to take a ride. Let's go. Yes. Welcome to another edition of Church Sound Podcast. I'm your humble host, Mr. Prentiss. You know, I'm not going to finish my name, but I love when you clap for me. It makes me feel real gooey inside. And I'm very fond of myself at this moment. Anyway, my name is, you know what my name is. Welcome to Season 4. We're live on location here at the Wave event in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, the thing about Louisville, Kentucky, it is the birthplace of one of the greatest men known to mankind. This man changed boxing forever, changed social justice forever. He started out as Cassius Clay. This is the home of Muhammad Ali, the people's champ. The people's champ. So, we're here on location, man. I'm having a great time. I have a great guest. I happen to be here presenting about podcasting here at this event and met some great people. And one of the great people I met is actually on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats and dogs of all ages, please welcome. I said cats and dogs. Cats and dogs of all ages, please welcome to the program, Chad Kirkpatrick.
Hey.
Did I say it right?
You got it.
You know,
Three names in one, three times the fun.
I had to make sure that my consonants were lining up correctly, because, that's very important in the pronunciation of your name.
Or what you can do is you get your face so close to the microphone that you can later overdub it and people can't see your lips moving.
I hadn't thought about that. I just hadn't thought about that. Hey, welcome to the program, man.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm so excited to having you guys on, especially you. We're going to get Pat on next, but
not especially Pat.
Not especially Pat.
Chad, not Pat.
No, not especially Pat. But I was in your course, and we're going to talk about mixing, and I really want to talk about gain staging because your concept of gain staging, the way you explained it, is really the reverse of how it's taught. Mm-hmm. Because I was taught unity, and I really got away from it. The thing is, I got away from it and didn't know I got away from it.
Okay, that's interesting.
You know what I mean? Because after a while, you start mixing, you start doing what works. But it was no concept name to it, like look at the meter. Like, when did this epiphany happen for you? First of all, explain your concept of gain staging in two different ways.
So, in this course, what we did, so first of all, like you, I'm a musician as well. I used to play bass guitar all the time, and I got to do some music directing. I've done a lot of studio work, live work. Front of house is my main thing these days. But so being well-rounded in all that is so important because when you're on stage and you feel the effects of someone doing gain staging wrong, that's when you realize the importance of doing it right. And not to like toot my own horn, but a lot of musicians I work with will come up to me afterwards and like, I don't know what it is, but the ears always feel really good when you run sound. And honestly, most of the things I'm sitting in their ears are before any of my processing. So they're really just hearing the gain staging and maybe a little bit of EQ and compression, but there's nothing really wild I'm doing.
Right.
But a lot of it is just like getting the gain right at the beginning, and then that allows the musicians to do what they need to do. If you have a separate broadcast console, they can do what they need to do. And then, of course, we can do what we need to do with the board, but with the faders, not with the gain knob. So with all that in mind, in our course, we talked about two different ways of setting gain. Mixing to unity, as you mentioned earlier, is where you put the fader at unity and then you turn the gain knob up to get the level that you want to hear in the house. The problem with that is completely subjective. So like if I like the bass guitar really loud, and so my fader's at unity, I set the gain wherever it needs to be. Let's say it's like 3/4, and I'm like, okay, that's great. And the next week you come on my same mix, but you like the bass less. Your fader's still at unity, but you're turning the gain down.
Right.
And so you're getting subjectively what you want in front of house. The problem is that knob affects everybody else, including yourself, but also the people on stage, people on broadcast. So if you subjectively turn down that gain knob, it affects the bass player on stage as well.
Right.
So what I teach, and I was really lucky, as you asked earlier, one of my first things doing live sound, or doing sound in general, was I was an intern in a recording studio. And Garth Cooper, if you're out there, owe you a lot. But I interned for him, and he taught me that very first thing in the studio. And he's a drummer, so he understood that. And that just stuck with me from the beginning. So I was lucky that I started from that position. So when I saw people doing the mixing to unity, that was completely foreign to me.
Right.
I'm like, well, why would you do that?
Right.
And so mixing to a meter means that you start with your fader all the way down, you set your gain, and you're looking at the input meter for that channel. And so if the bass player is going, you say, okay, give me whatever your loudest thing is going to be. If you have a pedal going, turn all this stuff on. And then you turn your gain knob up until you're hitting somewhere between -18 and -12, tends to be a sweet spot. That's where your meters usually turn from green to yellow or amber. And so you've got plenty of room. Even if he gets a little bit excited later on, he's hopefully not going to hit the red, but you're also not really far down in the green. So again, if you want less bass in your mix, you just turn your fader down.
Right.
And it makes the musician so happy, because otherwise, you've probably heard this before, man, I got my channel all the way up, my mix all the way up, my pack all the way up, I still can't hear myself.
Right.
That's why. It's because the gain's not set right at the source.
I think to be completely honest, a lot of people don't understand that the gain stage affects every output.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it that way, and I think because I didn't learn traditionally how to mix, I kind of learned as I went, that I understood it, but no one explained it to me.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it did, and the bells didn't come on until someone complained about I can't hear myself, and I'm like, well, I can.
Yeah,
you know?
sounds great in the house.
I mean, what are you talking about? It's loud enough. The bottom's coming off the floor. Can you see the carpet bubbling? What's going on? And then they would go, no, and I can't hear myself. And I would turn the gain and say, oh yeah, thanks. And I'm like, oh, this affects everybody.
Well, on a digital mixer,
I see dead people. This affects everyone.
On a digital mixer, it's the last setting that is analog before it switches into digital.
Right.
So it's arguably the most important thing, because if it's wrong, especially if you overgain it and it's distorting, you can't really fix that later on down the line.
No, ones and zeros can't fix that.
No. So you got to get right at the beginning. It makes everything better. And a lot of churches, a lot of the reason why they have that issue is not an input gain issue, it's an output gain issue.
Right.
So a lot of times they have their speakers too loud, and so if you were to try to gain, like I just said, you have to have your faders down to like -30, -50, and of course you have like no room to work, and if you push it up at all, it's feeding back, it's distorting.
Right.
Really all you need to do is just turn your speakers down a little bit, and then you can push all those faders closer to unity naturally.
Right.
And then you get the best of both worlds.
All right, so let me ask you a question, an engineer question. Okay. Do you prefer top and bottom snare or just top?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that. Okay, so I like both, and keep in mind, most of the time that I'm mixing bands, it's like Hillsong style worship. You know, like there's a lot of cymbals going on, and I'm trying. And a lot of times we'll have the drummer in an enclosure, and we're trying to make that snare drum like really come through, but not have a ton of cymbal bleed in it. So what I've been doing lately is I'm pretty aggressive with my gating on the snare drum. So I let the top drum, it's got a lot of reverb on it, it's gated really heavy. When it goes off, it's kind of like a shotgun. But whenever there's like articulation going on, it's like a marching snare kind of thing, my bottom snare mic is fairly heavily compressed to kind of bring some of that out.
It's like three, 4, like where are you at?
Yeah, probably like 3 to 6.
Okay.
6 would be the high end of it, so not that heavily, but enough just to kind of like bring some of that out.
What about your attack and release? Like where are you at normally?
Usually for drums, I kind of go off of the old SSL SSL compressor numbers. Like
Mm-hmm.
so, it's usually 1, 10, or 30. So usually 30 if I want the most amount of click
Oh
to come
yeah.
through, you know. So that goes for my kick and my snare. But I don't gate the bottom snare. So that
Oh,
way we're
okay. So
getting
you,
our
so you,
ghost notes
oh,
coming from
you're
there.
breathing. You got some breathing
Exactly
going on.
right.
Okay.
So, and that tends to give me the best of both worlds. I got the big hits coming from the top with a lot of reverb. I've got the other stuff kind of filling in the gaps. And when you mix those two together, you don't really hear a lot of choppiness from the top snare. And I don't know if this is getting too far in the weeds, but my favorite trick right now is using the Waves F6 on the snare top
Really?
mic. Because what I'll do is I'm treating it like a
Okay.
multi-band
All right.
gate.
So to all my listeners who aren't wave users,
Mm.
or think that we're talking about the beach and the sand, and no, we're not talking. We're talking about a company that sells plugins. That's very famous. It's very expensive. Very expensive. Lamborghini style. But anyway,
Less expensive these days, though.
less expensive these days.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was like,
Oh yeah.
if you had waves, right? If you had waves and you had your little eye lock and you walk into a studio and be like, "Excuse me," you know. Oh my God.
Man, the bundle I use these
Yes,
days,
waves.
the bundle I bought most recently was less than $300, but it is still listed as $4,000 on their website.
Oh.
But they haven't sold for $4,000 in like 10 years.
He was like, well, I have the $4,000, $300 product. You know, but anyway.
Well, they realize we can either sell it at $4,000 and people will steal it, or we can sell it at $300 and people will legitimately buy it. And
Give me the creamy crack version. The creamy crack version.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. So I own my plugins and I like
You own
them.
your plugins?
I do.
You know, it's an old guy right now in the studio somewhere listening to his podcast going, well, I rode the wave here on the truck and I have waves. It float. I don't have it in my church. My church we don't have a wave. Can you young man, can you explain what is a wave? Because a wave is very, very powerful. You know, water is very fluid.
Mm.
It's very fluid.
Mm.
It can satisfy you and run you away at the same time.
Gives you that wet tone.
Give you the wet
Yeah.
tone. So I'm in my little church up here in Kentucky. I'm trying to. Excuse me. I'm trying to make sure that you can explain what a F. What's the name of the number thing? Is the F what?
The F6.
The F6. Now, help me there, young man. Can you explain what the F6 is? Thank you.
So it's not.
Amen, amen. I felt that in my spirit there, boy. I felt that in my shana. Nah, that's what I felt it at.
Dude, but seriously, F6, it's like the wonder plugin, man. It's so good. It's a dynamic EQ. So what that means is it's like a regular EQ with compressor settings built into it.
So you set it to a frequency, pretty much.
Yes. So
Okay.
like the thing I use it the most for, especially if I'm using it live, is on female vocals. When they get, I call it diva mode. As soon as they really hit that chorus and they know really well, they get a little bit screechy sounding.
Like 2K-ish?
Around 3K.
Okay.
Usually 2 to 4K is kind of like where I find our vocalists tend to have that issue.
Okay.
And so what it is an EQ. So I just take, a band at 3K and drop it down a little bit. And then when they hit a certain volume, it's like a magic hand just says, nope, less of that. And then as soon as they're done singing in diva mode, let's put that back in so you have it when you're singing soft.
Okay.
And this does all that for you. Where you can get really sneaky with it.
Okay, do you when you have it there, you have your
Mm-hmm.
dynamic EQ, you have your compression set at that frequency. It's kind of like a multi-compressor in a sense, kind of built into the EQ. That's why they call it a dynamic EQ.
It is. The difference between a multi-band compressor and a dynamic EQ is the crossover points.
It's the concept, though. It's the same
concept,
Right,
100%.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just you can change the width. You can have things overlap.
So it's kind of like
multi-band
surfing.
EQ, there are like just
It's
four
kind
of
of
them side by side.
like surfing.
Yeah.
It's fluid.
It's like having the Holy Spirit's got his hand on your heart.
Hey, I felt
he's
that.
just,
I felt
going
that.
up and down
I
for you.
felt that.
Yeah.
Young man, continue.
Okay, so here's where it gets really wild. Okay, so keeping that concept in mind, you can also go the opposite direction. When the level hits a certain volume, it will go up. So what I do on like snare drum, for example, if you were to try to just straight up gate a snare drum to keep the cymbals out, you have two options. you can do a really fast release. So when the snare drum opens up, it immediately clamps it down so you don't hear catch, because that cymbal sneaks in.
Right.
But if you make it really fast, so pop, and then it closes down, the problem is that your low mids of your snare, where the body is, also chokes.
Right.
And so now your snare sounds like really wimpy sounding.
Right.
So what I do is I take the F6, I take a high shelf, and I take out all the high end, like 1K up. And so when you hear it before it starts going, you don't hear any cymbals. You also don't hear any clarity from the snare. So what happens is when the snare drum hits, that EQ undoes itself. So instead of reducing 12 dB of highs, it immediately brings that back up.
Oh, you get
and
that
you can
shame.
set how fast it comes back down. So it comes back up so you hear the snare hit, and then immediately chops back down so you don't hear the cymbals come in. And because it's only a high shelf, everything below that, your low mids, still come through like normal.
Right.
So you can then throw a regular gate after that with a slower release. So what ends up happening is the snare drum hits, both gate and the F6 open up at the same time, the cymbals like slam down after, and the rest kind of slowly comes down. And it makes it sound like a snare drum sample, but it's real. And it's expander, so like as they're playing, it kind of like opens and closes to the way they're playing. But if you do that on your snare, your toms, even your kick, it's crazy. If you get it right, and if your drummer plays consistently, you need to have that to make it work right. But all of a sudden, your overheads sound amazing.
Right.
Because you're not constantly hearing them in 6 other mics that are happening on your kit.
Right.
And so if you're like
you can
trying
really
to do stereo,
you can really polish the sound off.
It makes a huge difference. And I have a video on my channel where I just turn all that on and off.
Shameless plug. What is your channel? So we can go there.
So if you're on YouTube, you can search Ascension Worship Tech Tuesday, or the quick way to get there is at AW Tech Tuesday.
Well, this will be in the show notes, so make sure you send me the link. This way, it'll be in the show notes. So, guys, if you're listening, you want to check out this concept, because I do, because I learned something today, and so did Pastor Brown. Pastor Brown learned something today too. Good God Almighty, boy, you was a smart cookie, ain't you?
You know, I can just fake it when I need to.
So let me ask you this. So I get your favorite plugin, and I get your favorite over and under. All right. So now we're gonna go to the bottom. All right. 4-string or 5-string bass you prefer?
I'm a 4-string guy.
You're a 4-string guy. I would have thought you would want that low B. I would have thought you wanted it.
It's just an issue of my hand knowing where to go. Like I started with a 4-string. Anytime I try to do the 5, my muscle memory doesn't come for it. You know.
Gotcha. So
now I'll say this though, a little bit off topic, but I'm a synth bass guy. I love playing synth bass.
All right. What's your favorite synth?
In a world searching for meaning and hope, there's a place where voices rise, spirits are lifted, inspiration abounds, and edutainment and faith meet within culture. Welcome to the Repurpose Podcast Network, your haven for podcasts that envelops the everyday lives of believers. Shows about relationships, news, sports, business, pop culture, health, politics, music, ministry, and so much more. With so much negative content defining the Black experience, our audience is underserved, and controlling the narrative is on the forefront. We amplify, elevate, empower Black creators to share with the world their thoughts and ideas, to push culture into the future. Tune in and unlock a world of captivating content that entertains and uplifts. Let your mind be enthralled, your heart stimulated, and your spirit elevated. The Repurpose Network. One message, many voices.
Well, for practical reasons, if I'm playing live somewhere, the chord monologue.
Nice
It's
piece.
tiny. It can
Nice
fit on
piece.
it barely fits on a keyboard stand. I have to put it on a keyboard stand and then electrical tape it on. But it's so lightweight and it's analog, but it's MIDI controlled analog, so you can still save settings and
Are you using
it's
your
really
bass to
fun
control it, or are you playing it?
playing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my rule, and I don't get to do this as often anymore, but I went to Hillsong for a few years, and whenever I was there, I would play that, and I would say, the rule is the real bass is always going to be my main thing. I never want the synth bass to be more powerful, because usually during soft spots, I'm doing that. I've got infinite sustain. I can do some things that my bass can't do. But whenever the drums kick in, that's when I switch to the real bass.
Gotcha.
And so I always want those to kind of be different staging of low end in the mix.
So do this for me. You mentioned Hillsong earlier. You mentioned Hillsong in your presentation, which was amazing. And if you guys were to go on the site and be able to see it, you would be impressed. Very, very good
Which I
demonstration.
think Wave put the notes in the show notes for it, but last year they put a bunch of the sessions online later,
Yeah.
so your session and my session will be on there. So if you couldn't come to Kentucky to watch it, you'd need to go on their website later
Yeah,
to watch it.
yeah, very, very powerful stuff. So now you made me lose my train of thought.
You're talking about Hillsong.
I was talking about Hillsong, the song on the hill, right? That piece. So you mentioned that you went there in the UK, right?
Australia.
Australia, okay, nice country, especially in the
It's
winter
upside
time.
down.
It's upside down,
Yeah.
especially in December. It's really great in December. If you want to get a tan, really great in December. So, was it like a school? Like what? It was a school.
Yep.
So explain that to me, because I was really blown away. I had no idea about this.
Yeah, so they have a college. I think they just call it Hillsong College now, but it used to be Hillsong International Leadership College, and it's awesome. It's a really, really good school, especially now that COVID's pretty much done. You can go back and go there, but it's awesome. It's a Bible school, but they have, I was there for bass guitar, and so I got to do classes, and it's incredibly practical. So like while you're doing the classes, they also have you serving at some of the local campuses around there. So you get to put into practice right away the things that you're learning in your classes, and it's awesome. So I went there for bass guitar, but it's awesome because like even just being there for bass, I told them like I do some production stuff as well, and they're like, okay, well you can always volunteer somewhere. And youth group is like the best place to serve at Hillsong because you get to do some really bold things really quickly, and there's always a need for people there. So I was really lucky. I went there in 2012, and that was the year they started doing Hillsong Young and Free, which is basically their youth group band. And now they travel around the world.
Right.
And so it's really cool. Like they're just a local church that happens to do things on an international level. Like they're really, really cool. There's plenty of ways to get involved. The people are awesome. Like you can just see people that are technically internationally famous just having lunch at the shops, and like it's not a big deal over there. In fact, in Australia, the people that live in the area don't even realize how big that church is.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's weird. So I made a lot of good friends out there, and like got tons of experience right away, even outside of the classes. In fact, the classes are actually really easy. It's the things that you do outside of that where you get really good practical experience really fast. So I was there for 3 years.
So did you stay over there the entire 3 years?
I did. I wasn't one of those guys who had enough money to fly back and forth.
I'm going home for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, for sure. and like you mentioned, during Christmas time over there is the summer. And so when we didn't have classes going on, you're not allowed to work a whole lot during school time, but you could work during Christmas time. And so when other people went back home, I would stay there and do like weddings and funerals on campus, and that's how I made money to survive. And
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I was there for 3 years, and I came back in 2015.
The reason why I really know about the weather is because I used to rep a company that was stationed there.
Oh, cool.
That was located there, and they would have to call me at the times was upside down, so they have to call. I would get on a morning call at like 9 or 10 o'clock, and for a
so that would be
business call.
like 2 in the morning usually. And the weird thing about Sydney, they have daylight savings time, but not the same day that we have daylight savings time. So most of so it was always either 14 hours ahead or 16 hours ahead. And then there was like 3 weeks in between where it was 15 hours ahead because we would change at different times.
Right.
So
exactly.
trying to like have calls back home, you'd have to like figure out, okay, it's gonna be 2 a.m. for me, but it'll be 10 a.m. for you, and like a different day, and like trying to work it out was crazy.
Right.
and like with Christmas time, this goes to show how Americanized Christmas has become. It's really hot out there, but Santa Claus is always depicted as like fully like there's like snow in the windows, fake snow and stuff, but Santa is always wearing shorts on a surfboard, and like it's just like this weird combination of like commercialism in Christmas. Yeah.
So what was your biggest takeaway from your experience there?
Oh man, so much. Okay, so here's the one that I talk about the most. So I came back to the States. I work with a ministry called Ascension Worship, and one of the things I do is about the YouTube channel, and then we do consultation for churches, we do conferences. And one of the things that I've seen as like the biggest need lately, something that I'm really, really lucky that I learned my first 6 months when I was at Hillsong. When you're a student at Hillsong, the first 6 months, you are not allowed on platform on Sundays. Like, they don't want you getting a big head right away. So you clean bathrooms, during conference, like you're learning, but you're not on stage until 6 months in.
Right.
I was there for bass. They found out I knew a lot about production. So when that first 6 months ended, like my planning center just exploded. So all that to say, that first 6 months before my planning center exploded, I went to an elective course at Hillsong Men for a book called Boundaries. Have you read Boundaries?
I have not.
Okay. If you are working in a church, especially if you're leadership, you need to go buy a bunch of copies of Boundaries. It's by Henry Cloud. It's only like that thick, and you really only need to read the first like 3 chapters to get it. But the idea is learning how to say no to certain things so that you can guarantee that you can say yes to those other things. And burnout is a real big issue. When COVID hit, the Hillsong alumni Facebook was really revealing, because there were a few people who said some things that blew my mind, where like they were throwing around the word abuse, and it's like, okay, no, if you're going to use the word abuse, it has to be real. We have to take this serious. And the same people that called out abuse at Hillsong were the ones that I remember that didn't know how to say no when we were at college together. And so sure enough, they have this dream in mind that I'm going to be the next big worship leader at Hillsong. All this stuff's going to happen. And Australia's immigration laws are like as bad or worse than America's. You just don't know about it because it's not advertised the same way. They're not as well known, internationally.
Right.
And so they had this thing where like you had to prove to the Australian government that you could do a job better than an Aussie to like get your papers to stay in the country.
What?
So yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, they're a small country, and Hillsong had a habit of getting visas for a lot of like Americans and Canadians, that kind of thing. So all that to say, people kind of get in their mind, I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna be the next big thing, and then next thing you know, we got to go back home to wherever you are in the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they had it in their mind this something was going to happen, and they didn't, and then later on they're like, oh, they abused me. It's like, no, they didn't abuse you. You just didn't know how to say no. So
when you say I don't know how to say no, explain that.
Okay, so I'll tell you, and this is what's ironic, is that this happened in a class, and I guess no one else was listening. But Pastor Joel Abell, who was, I don't know if he still is, but he was in charge of all the Australian campuses of Hillsong at the time, came into a class for us, and he had some really cool advice. He said, I put in my calendar times for myself. He said, I might have in my calendar, Tuesday at 2 p.m. golf with Joel. He goes, I put it in my calendar, so if anyone says, hey, can you come do this meeting at 2 o'clock, I can look at my calendar and say, oh, I have an appointment at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. They don't need to know that the appointment is with myself. That doesn't make it any less valid than if it was with, whoever else. But it's in my calendar. There's something solid about it. And then I have the ability, if I want to say, you know what, I'm going to reschedule that appointment with myself and do this thing. Or you can say, I'm going to do this thing. And people in that class, their minds just blew. They're like, how are you one of the top leaders in this church right now, and you're saying no to things? And they didn't get it. That's how he's there. Is that he didn't burn out along the line.
Exactly.
He said that when he goes home at night, he has office hours at 5 o'clock or whatever it is, he goes home. If his phone rings and it's anyone other than his kids, his wife, or he did make an exception for Brian Houston, the senior pastor at the time. If it wasn't one of those three people, he would hang up. So they'll figure it out. We'll talk about when I get back in office hours tomorrow at 9 a.m. It is not the end of the world.
You know the crazy thing? I've adopted that forever. I've adopted it, and my wife will hate me when I say this, but if I would say no to her, and she was like, when we were first dating, she's like, I don't understand why you're saying no. I said, because it's in the dictionary. It should be used. Because no is no, yes is yes. Now, if you're trying to convince me, I'll let you try. If it fits what we're doing, it's yes. If it's not, then it's no. So I do that with my team, and the churches I work with. Is like, if you call me past 7 o'clock, and if you send me an email after 7 o'clock, and I first got the position I'm in now, I was like, I'm just letting you know right now that I'm not answering it. Because I don't work 24 hours a day.
That's right.
I work from these hours. Now,
I mean, it's hard because you have everything, your personal life and your business life, in this little box.
Right.
You gotta know when to not look at the box.
That's so true, and then because burnout is so real if you don't learn to say no.
And also, as a church leader or leader of any organization, the other part of this boundaries book was having your own boundaries, but also understanding and even enforcing the boundaries on others. So, like, if I'm a leader and you're one of the people underneath me, and I see the telltale signs that you're on the verge of burnout, I need to set boundaries for you so that you can make it the long way.
Right. That's good stuff. So, when you came back, what did you notice anything different about yourself when you arrived back?
I think I just had more of an awareness of ministry in general, and on a practical side, like, I learned a lot about digital mixers when I was out there. Before I went out there, I think I touched an LS9 like twice, and then I had experience in the studio using digital audio software, but most of it was like constantly mixing on like CL5s and that kind of thing.
Okay, all right. So before we get out of here, we do this game called 30 seconds. 30 seconds and gone. True, false, yes, no question. You answer it any way you like, any format you want to answer. All right, question number 1. What's your go-to microphone? Swiss Army.
I guess the Sennheiser E835. You can do on pretty much anything.
Okay, all right. You already answered the base question I was going to throw at you, so we can't go.
4-string.
We can't go with that one. All right. Favorite kick drum microphone.
Ooh, Sennheiser E902.
This guy, he pulled it out. He's like, it's a great mic.
That's great.
It is a great mic. Okay. Question number 3. Favorite style of music to mix.
I love mixing live albums, like getting the room mics in there. So pretty much anything live, mostly worship these days.
Okay. Go-to audience microphone.
Oh, okay. Only because it's practical and it's cheap. Usually I do like the Rode M5. It's only $200 per pair.
Yes. Would you use a shotgun mic in some regards? Would you use like a Sennheiser like 416?
I used to. I think it was the MKE 600 was like the one I used
to
use.
It's brighter.
But I kind of like having, because a lot of our churches are medium size. I like the cardioid, pattern. It's not so directional. I'm going to hear one person singing like I would with a shotgun.
Okay, last question. What was your favorite cereal as a child?
Oh, still today, Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
There we have it. 30 seconds and
I
gone.
don't know if you can win that game, but I feel like I won that game. Pat literally woke up to get inside about sending Toast Crunch in the corner.
Hey, I hope you guys had a great time.
I had a great time.
I hope you enjoyed yourself. It will be in the show notes. And to see you next time, keep God first in everything you do. See you next time on the Church Sound Podcast.